All right, we need to look at freedom of speech with our next civil liberty. Um, Couple things here. Freedom of speech is kind of often lumped in with uh, freedom of press, and it's called freedom of expression. Um, One of the biggest things that you'll see as we go through our civil liberties is that freedom of speech often comes into conflict with other rights, as does freedom of press. You can see some of those rights listed here, but it often does come into conflict with those. One of the big questions with speech is what is speech? And what we've kind of brought this down to is that there's two types of speech. Um, so when the framers wrote the Constitution, they definitely wanted free speech to be a right. Um, you know that was unimpeachable, if you will. So free speech has been pretty much protected from the government. The thing that's been hard with free speech is that a lot of the times free speech protects unpopular views. Um, and it's easy to say, oh yeah, let's protect this unpopular view, but when somebody says something that is basically unfathomable for us to be able to go and say, well, that's freedom of speech, it's often a very hard thing. Probably the best example of that is listed here with the Westboro Bible Group. We'll talk about them a little bit as we go. Just a rough group of people to give First Amendment rights to, but again, part of what we do. You already have a little bit of background with the Schenck versus U.S. The Espionage Act around World War One. The way that Schenck asked people to assert their rights and resist the military, and the fact that he was arrested, and later his argument that it violated free speech. You can see here Holmes is his majority opinion in the case on free speech, and it brings in probably one of the biggest things when you talk about free speech is shouting fire in a theater. If someone would do that, shout fire in a theater and have that cause panic, free speech would not apply to that. So what they came up with was this clear and present danger test. And this is, again, a precedent or an example. And it says, look, free speech isn't absolute. There are ways that free speech can be taken away. Talking about overthrowing the government. You bring up McCarthyism. And basically, there's only so many things you can say. Clear and present danger is really the first part of this. The Brandenburg case, the Supreme Court limited clear and present danger. So basically, they said that the government could punish the advocacy of illegal action only if it was producing imminent lawless action. So it has to actually produce that action. If that action doesn't occur, then they can't be punished for it. Another limit on free speech is libel and slander. You can see what they are here. And there's just some things you can't say about people. One thing that to be very clear here is that just saying that this person isn't a nice person, that's not libel or slander. the libel and slander has to cause some kind of damage to the person. All right. The other part of this is that if you're a public figure, you're held to a different standard, and the people can say more about you in that sense. And you can see the New York Times versus Sullivan case there. Another limit on free speech is obscenity. There's only certain places that obscenity is acceptable, and it is a limit on free speech. Now, the part that is kind of up for interpretation here is what is obscene. Something that is obscene to one group may be art to others. So there's no real consensus here as to what is obscene. A couple cases on this. The Roth case. The Roth actually said that obscenity is not protected speech. But again, goes back to that problem: what is obscene? The Miller case really tried to clarify what is obscene, and a lot of this deals with pornography. The Miller test, if you will, tries to bear that part out, and give a standard of what is acceptable in a community. Another limit on free speech, talk about symbolic speech. I said there were two types of speech: pure speech and symbolic speech. And symbolic speech is nonverbal communication. So, as is the case here, if you wear an armband that has a peace sign on it, is that symbolic speech? And basically, what happened in Tinker versus Des Moines, these two kids, the Tinkers, they wore the armbands. They were suspended from school, and it went to the Supreme Court. And the court said, "Look, you don't shed your constitutional right at school. What they were doing is free expression, and they could do it." Probably the most famous case with free expression and symbolic speech is Texas versus Johnson, where the Supreme Court ruled that flag burning is a form of symbolic speech. Very, very controversial. But it again, it's what the Supreme Court ruled, that it is symbolic speech. And you can see states can make it a crime if it's being burned to threaten racial terror, something like that. All right, that's freedom of speech. Thank you. Have a nice day.